we all know, man. I just said it. I need those other guys, for me to be able to make plays, and I feel like offensive line and defensive line are the most important people on the field.
What you should be getting the sense of here is that the Jonathan Taylor decision, the team that makes this decision, we all believe, and so has everyone who's been through here, he could be the difference in someone making it to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, look, he's got more home run capability at his best than what Zeke did. And look, and I love Zeke. We know that Zeke was a pounder now.
Yeah.
He was an absolute workhorse. Go back. I'm telling you, do not look at 2022 film on JT. Just don't do it, because the Colts offensive line, everything was in shambles.
Jonathan Taylor is the new Dalvin Cook for the Miami Dolphins fan base. They just can't seem to get enough of the shiny object that keeps coming up in front of them. But there's a big problem, a huge problem that's not being addressed. Tyreek Hill just admitted that the guys up front, the guys in the trenches on the offensive line and the defensive line, are of the utmost importance in the success of an NFL football team. Louis Riddick just told you not to look at last year's film of Jonathan Taylor. Why? Because the Indianapolis Colts offensive line was in a shambles. But nonetheless, here we go again with the Miami Dolphins fan base, especially on Twitter. Is there another NFL fan base anywhere that gets infected with the shiny object syndrome as much as Miami Dolphins fans do? Seriously, over the last year, I have watched Miami Dolphins fans absolutely drool and covet every single player that has come on the mark, except offensive linemen and, of course, quarterbacks. Don't dare talk about bringing in another quarterback when we already have the left hand of God. Oh my God, that's a cardinal sin. But every other position, sign them all. Bring them all in. Understand, there are 3 weeks, 18, 19 days left until the Los Angeles Chargers game. 3 weeks. That's it. And this team is still shuffling chairs around on the deck. Kansas City, they're not. The Philadelphia Eagles, they're not. The Cincinnati Bengals, they're not. Why is that? Perhaps they're better run organizations, while those teams who are in championship mode are just fine-tuning their debut, just getting ready for the season. The Miami Dolphins are still shuffling around trying to see whatever kind of shiny object they can bring in, because they are not ready for their debut against the Los Angeles Chargers. There'd be no other reason for chasing the shiny object called Jonathan Taylor. It's time for Miami Dolphins fans to understand having the best team on paper doesn't mean anything come September 10th. You have got to bring it on the field. Having the best team on paper and looking fantastic was great for the last 8 months, but it's meaningless now. Now, you have to have the best team on the field for the next 20 weeks, or for as many of those 20 weeks as you possibly can. Me, I'm not a fanboy. I don't get bogged down in shiny objects. I look into a team's depth. I look to see what they have ready to put on the field right now. I know that winning in the trenches, both sides, offensive line and defensive line, is what makes championship caliber teams, and that's undeniable. While the Miami Dolphins arguably have one of the top defensive fronts in the entire league, if not the top defensive front in the entire league, their offensive line is in the bottom tier of the league, and it's only gotten worse. Currently, the Miami Dolphins offensive line is only ranked 23rd in the league, and it's only that high because of Teron Armstead being there. And we all know that having Teron Armstead for 16, 17, 18 weeks is a crapshoot at best. And here we are with 3 weeks left before the curtain rises on the Miami Dolphins season against the Chargers. They still don't even know who's going to be starting on the offensive line. Think about that for a second. As of today, the Miami Dolphins don't know who will be starting on the offensive line come September 10th against the Chargers. They just don't know. Yet you have people out here hyping up and wondering whether or not the Dolphins can sign Jonathan Taylor when you'd be putting him in the exact same position he was in 2022 with the Indianapolis Colts. The line is a shambles. It was a shambles there. It's a shambles here. If you're Jonathan Taylor and you're at the pinnacle of your game and you're only 24 years old, Why would you dare put your livelihood behind the Miami Dolphins offensive line? Why would you trust an organization that's failed to develop an offensive line? I don't think you would. In fact, the Colts offensive line is actually much better than the Miami Dolphins offensive line. Why would Jonathan Taylor go backwards? For money? Maybe. But it's going to be short-lived money if you don't have anybody blocking for you. If I'm Jonathan Taylor, I'm looking at this. Sharps has always been considered one of the top analytic firms for NFL data. And by the way, what you're going to see are the teams that the Miami Dolphins have on the schedule this year highlighted in yellow. Let's take a look here. So, offensive line. So if you're Jonathan Taylor and you're looking at this, you're saying, Eagles, yeah, they're a good line. And Ravens and Chiefs and Browns and Cowboys, all these teams right now potentially could use a running back. I wouldn't say the Raiders because they've got Josh Jacob and he's holding out as well. But you look down here and it's not until number 23 do the Miami Dolphins even show up. They have one of the worst offensive lines in the entire league. All these other teams above the Miami Dolphins who could possibly need a running back have better offensive line right now. Now understand, I'm going to show you something with this ranking. When you scroll down to the rankings here and you get to the Miami Dolphins, it says the Dolphins offensive line appears to be the weak link, and it's Miami's only unit ranked in the bottom half of the league. The health of Teron Armstead will be critical to the unit. Armstead ranked 4th among left tackles with a 3.4% pressure rate allowed, and when Armstead was out, he missed 4 games, Miami left tackles allowed an unimaginably pathetic 13.7 pressure rate. So let me ask you, if you're Jonathan Taylor and you see this data, would you sign with the Miami Dolphins? It would take a lot of money for me to sign with the Miami Dolphins and risk my entire career behind one of the most pathetic, their words, pathetic offensive lines in the NFL if Teron Armstead doesn't play all 20 games, which more than likely he won't. Now let's look at the defensive side of the ball, and it's kind of scary what the current Miami Dolphins offensive line is going to have to face this season. Okay, now you're looking at the top defensive fronts for the NFL. Okay, this is what the Miami Dolphins offensive line is going to have to face this year. You ready for this? Of course, I mentioned the Miami Dolphins are arguably the top defensive line in the NFL, but again, in yellow are the teams that the Miami Dolphins have to face this year and where their defensive lines are ranked. So one of the lowest ranked offensive lines in the NFL are going to face all these teams on their schedule. The Eagles, the Cowboys, the Commanders, the Bills twice, the Giants, the Panthers, and the Jets twice. The bulk of the Miami Dolphins schedule is against the teams with the top defensive lines in the entire league. So ask yourself a question if you were Jonathan Taylor. Mr. Taylor, why would you want to sign with a team who has basically one of the worst offensive lines in the league that still hasn't been resolved, and then yet has to face the top defensive lines in the entire NFL for most of the season? Is that a recipe for success? I don't think so. Excuse me, I'm not buying into the hype about Jonathan Taylor coming to the Miami Dolphins. From all estimations, even from Louis Riddick, this kid has his head on, and he's a really, really, really good kid who understands all the ramifications of his decisions. And unless he's really become money hungry, I don't think the Dolphins have a chance. Dolphins fans are nuts for being infected with the shiny object syndrome instead of looking at what exactly is in front of their face come this season. The Dolphins have a huge problem ahead. Huge. And nobody seems to want to talk about it. And it seems as though the team hasn't really thought much about addressing it.
You know, I think you guys are probably more worried than we are.
On paper, there's no doubt that this team could play with anybody and could go, in fact, to the Super Bowl. But the games have to be played. And the games are won and lost by the guys up front. Your offensive line and your defensive line. Defensive line, top notch. Offensive line, bottom tier in the NFL. That's not a recipe for success no matter how you look at it. The big guys up front win games, period. And the Miami Dolphins have not, as of yet, solidified their offensive line to move them up a few tiers in the NFL. To me, that's problematic. A lot of people aren't looking at that, but I stare a lot at offensive line play. And, it looked good playing against the Texans, and it looked good playing against the Falcons. Those guys don't count. That's preseason. You're going to face the Chargers in week 1, and as you saw, it doesn't get any easier throughout the entire season. The big guys up front win games, period. No discussion. Our defensive line, possibly one of the best in the NFL. Our offensive line, one of the worst in the NFL, and potentially getting worse with injuries. So why would Jonathan Taylor come here? I have no idea. And the fact that Chris Greer and the guys have not bulked up this offensive line to make a true Super Bowl run is beyond comprehension. I don't care what they did against the Texans in preseason. I don't care what they did against the Falcons in preseason. Remember last year, during preseason, the Miami Dolphins beat the Philadelphia Eagles. Philadelphia Eagles ended up playing in the Super Bowl. The Miami Dolphins were watching it on TV. If you don't have your offensive line in place, all of the high hopes, all of the hype, all of the grandeur of winning a Super Bowl will go out the window if you don't have an offensive line that can block. And that's not even talking about an injury-prone quarterback. I'm talking about bringing in a running back like Jonathan Taylor. Not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. I'm not saying that they won't bring him in. I'm just saying if Jonathan Taylor came in, you're running behind a even worse offensive line than you had last year, which Louis Riddick said to go ahead and discount. That's where we are. That's what my concern is going into this season. A lot of people don't agree with me, but I don't look at games on paper. I look at the guys up front and what they do. And right now, the Miami Dolphins offensive line is a huge weak link on this team. Let me know what you guys think. Fins up.
Is anybody catching on to this Barry guy?